Up next in the broadcast, President Park puts her foot down on the months-long paralysis at the National Assembly, calling on legislators to pass the ferry investigation bill, but she steps back from getting directly involved, citing constitutional limits. It's a one-year celebration for the resumption of the Kaesong Industrial Complex after North Korea unilaterally shut down the peninsula's only inter-Korean economic project, but challenges remain in maintaining trust. The U.S. expands its airstrikes against the extremist group known as the Islamic State as leaders from some 30 Western and Arab countries meet in Paris to come up with a solution to the crisis. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to Primetime News, live from Seoul. I am Kang Chery.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We start with the growing frustration with a frozen parliament. President Park Geun-hye spoke up again this Tuesday on the logjam created by arguments over the so-called ferry bill.
And she made clear that she cannot get involved, although the National Assembly Speaker stepped in with hopes of untangling the situation. Choi You-sun has our top story.
President Park Geun-hye was very clear in her first response to calls from the opposition party that she step in to resolve the current legislative deadlock over a probe into April's ferry sinking.
지금 진상조사위원회에 수사권과 기소권을 주자는 주장에 대해 일부에서는 대통령이 결단을 하라고 합니다. 하지만 그것은 삼권 분립과 사법 체계의 근간을 흔드는 일로 대통령으로서 할 수 없고.
Political discord over the issue has suspended parliamentary affairs for months, with the victims' families demanding that the committee stated in the bill have more power in the investigation. The president instead said the second bipartisan deal on the bill, which the opposition backtracked from last month, should be accepted. She also urged the National Assembly to quickly get past the ferry bill standoff and focus on improving people's livelihoods and national safety management. President Park relayed her position to the ruling party leadership at her office later in the day. With neither the ruling nor the opposition side willing to budge more than 2 weeks into the Assembly's regular session, Speaker Chung Lee-hwa took matters into his own hands.
The speakers decided on the Assembly's regular session schedule as the ongoing parliamentary paralysis with a lineup of pending bills has run counter to the people's wishes.
The standing committees, with or without the opposition, are expected to resume on Wednesday, with the ruling party aiming to pass other economic and reform-related bills at a plenary session on September 26th. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
North Korea has lodged a complaint about anti-Pyongyang propaganda leaflets from South Korea with a letter to South Korea's presidential office. A government official says it came from North Korea's National Defense Commission as a follow-up to one sent last week. Both letters said Seoul needed to put a stop to these leaflets if it wants to hold another round of high-level talks. South Korea's stance is that the Seoul government has no rights to stop private groups from flying the leaflets. No announcement out of Washington regarding a potential delay in the transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, but the word is we might find out from the two countries' bilateral security meeting next month. Kwon Soo-ah reports.
The timing and conditions for the transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul are still under discussion, despite expectations of an extension from next year's deadline to around 2020. High-level defense talks between National Security Advisor Kim Kwan-jin and his U.S. counterpart Susan Rice are ongoing in Washington. But South Korea's defense ministry said Tuesday that both sides have agreed not to specify a set date for the transfer yet. The ministry added the two allies are aiming to announce an agreement at an annual security meeting next month.
Korea and the U.S. are still in discussions. That's why we would thank you for understanding that currently we cannot give you any details.
The timing of the OPCON transfer is said to depend largely on how far South Korea goes in building its defense power against nuclear threats by the North. And the year 2020 is widely expected to be the right timing for the transfer given the schedule of Seoul's blueprint for its defense system. Washington has been in control over Korean forces when it comes to wartime operations since the end of the Korean War. And the two countries have not been able to conduct the transfer since 2007, when the idea of the transfer was first announced. Seoul requested to put off the 2012 transfer till 2015 due to North Korea's third nuclear test in February last year. Kwon-soa, Arirang News.
One year ago today, the two Koreas agreed to resume operations at their joint Kaesong industrial complex nearly 6 months after the North unilaterally shut it down.
Exactly, and that resumption was possible only after the two Koreas agreed on a set of measures to improve the management of the business park. And how improved is it? For more, we're joined by our Unification Ministry correspondent Kang joining us right here in the studio. So have those measures been effective?
Chery, unfortunately, no. When operations resumed at the Kaesong Industrial Complex, the two Koreas agreed on a set of measures to better manage the complex, like easing regulations for South Korean commuters, allowing the use of the internet and mobile phones, and attracting foreign investors. Well, a year has passed with very little progress. I went out to the inter-Korean border this morning and talked to some South Koreans who commute to work at Kaesong for their view. Take a look.
It's 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and these cars are making their daily commute to North Korea. They're South Korean workers who work at the Kaesong Industrial Complex.
It wasn't until a year ago that the South Korean workers were allowed to cross this border again. That's after North Korea unilaterally shut down the complex for 6 months amid heightening inter-Korean tensions.
The workers say not much have changed since then.
The security checks on vehicles is even tighter than before. They even check underneath the car seats.
If mobile phones were allowed, the internet will be available. That would be very convenient.
The 125 South Korean businesses in Kaesong are still struggling, with their total production volume at just 80% of what it was before the shutdown. Park Geun-hye, who runs a textiles factory, is among them.
We lost trust from our clients, which caused considerable damage. It will take a long time to recover. We had to compensate the clients on last year's losses.
Some blame the heavy South Korean sanctions against the North.
Because new investments in the complex are blocked in principle, the companies have trouble expanding their business.
Well, the sanctions were imposed back in 2010 after a North Korean torpedo attack on a South Korean warship. It bans all South Korean investments in the north, and this shuts out new businesses from entering Kaesong, which in turn restricts the growth of the business park.
Right. Well, one of the strategies for preventing some of these unilateral shutdowns was to invite more foreign businesses to set up operations there. How have those efforts been going?
Well, Sean, around 30 foreign firms from countries like Germany and China have shown an interest in opening up factories in Kaesong. 3 or 4 of them have actually visited the industrial zone to look into investment opportunities. But concerns over another unilateral closure are holding them back, and experts say the globalization process would gain momentum if governments were to step in.
If the Chinese government were to be more actively involved in bringing Chinese firms to the complex, the globalization process would be much more smooth.
In fact, Norwegian officials and businessmen visited Kaesong in May, and a delegation of Russian trade officials toured the industrial zone earlier this month. But experts add that as long as hurdles like North Korea's nuclear program and inter-Korean tensions remain, any eye-opening growth at the Kaesong industrial complex is unlikely anytime soon.
Well, at least we should be grateful that it's still open, but eventually we have to get to a place where that's not something that we consider a special thing.
Right.
Well, thanks so much, Sung-hee.
My pleasure.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chery from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
Korea's Finance Minister Choi You-sun marked his first 2 months in office today. Markets seem to have gained a boost from his expansionary policy drives, but even he questions how effective short-term measures will work on what he says are bigger, complex structural issues in the economy. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
It's been 2 months since the appointment of Choi You-sun as finance minister, and his expansionary policies to spur growth are starting to produce results in some areas. For one, the country's benchmark Kospi reached an almost 3-year high at the end of July. The stagnant real estate market is also showing signs of improvement, and the number of housing transactions jumped more than 5% in July from the previous month. However, some argue the economy has some way to go before it's back on path to a firm recovery. July's coincident and leading composite index, which indicates the health of the economy, was just over 100 and 101 respectively, unchanged from the previous month. A reading over 100 means that there are more optimists than pessimists on the economy. A reading under 100 indicates the opposite. The nation's job market hasn't really picked up either. In August, 594,000 jobs were created from a month earlier, but the majority of these jobs were part-time positions, and they're mostly filled by people in their 50s. On top of this, the real GDP growth rate grew a mere 0.5% on quarter, the lowest in 21 months. As a result, economic institutes, including the state-run Korea Development Institute, are reportedly considering lowering their growth projections for this year. 10 international banks have already cut their growth forecast for the Korean economy by 0.1 percentage point on average to 3.7%. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Contrary to Tokyo's recent efforts, international awareness of Japan's wartime atrocities is growing. And now China has joined the global campaign, becoming the second country outside Korea to unveil a statue in honor of survivors of Japan's sexual enslavement. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
An elderly woman is reminded of her past sufferings as she stares at a monument of a girl who's shown cowering while covering her face. China has unveiled its own statue dedicated to the women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during wartime. It's the first such statue in China in honor of the victims, known euphemistically as comfort women. The monument follows in the footsteps of similar ones in Korea and the United States. Currently, there are 2 statues in the U.S., one in the California city of Glendale and another in the Detroit suburb of Southfield. Both are replicas of the peace monument the Korean civic leaders set up in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul nearly 3 years ago. The organizers of China's statue did not mention where it will be located, but the unveiling coincides with the release of The Eyes of Dawn, a Chinese movie that is based on the victims' stories and the pain and suffering they were forced to endure at the hands of the Japanese military. Around 2,000 women, mostly Koreans, were forced into sexual servitude by Japanese soldiers during World War II.
The movie reenacts scenes from history and carries the message to never forget.
The movie, which hits the screens in China later this week, is expected to shed light once again on Japan's wartime atrocities and the Japanese government's failure to fully make amends. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Historically, the Korean Silk Road acted as a major cultural trade route that linked the country with the West during the Shilla dynasty. And today, some 150 local college students and academics began their own journey along the famed road to trail the path of their ancestors. Our Chi Myung-gil has more.
The Korean Silk Road was at the center of cultural interaction linking traders, merchants, pilgrims, and monks from Korea to the Mediterranean Sea during the Shilla Kingdom, when the capital was located in Gyeongsangbuk-do province.
Last year, Gyeongsangbuk-do Province initiated the Korean Silk Road project as part of an effort to revive the historical route to boost trade and to expand cultural exchanges like the Korean Wave.
A ceremony was held Tuesday in the southeastern port city of Pohang, signaling the start of the 45-day Korean Silk Road trip. The students' journey using the sea route will take them to a total of 9 countries, including China, Malaysia, India, before their final destination of Iran. Along the way, students will visit historical sites and hold cultural exchanges. At their first destination in Guangzhou, China, students will attend a symposium on promoting cultural ties between Korea and China. Students will donate the model of a Shilla crown to a Chinese museum as a symbol of their friendly ties.
In India, we will explore the footpaths of Korean Buddhist monk Hyecho, the first Korean monk who traveled to India. We will install a monument to commemorate him in the Sarnath grasslands.
The trip will help students better understand how the Shilla kingdom was able to flourish culturally and economically using the Korean Silk Road to blend foreign influences with Korean traditions and ideas. It's also intended to revive such a spirit in this generation, so they can better utilize the Silk Road routes to help boost Korea's competitiveness on the global stage. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News, Pohang.
The United States has carried out its first airstrikes on Islamic State militants near the Iraqi capital Baghdad under expanded military operations in this region.
With more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, U.S. warplanes have been bombing IS targets since last month, but experts say this latest offensive could mark a major turning point.
Absolutely. The attacks near Baghdad and in the north of the country have expanded the scope of the U.S. mission there, as laid out by President Obama last week. And this as top officials from Western and Arab powers wrapped up talks in Paris to help Iraq defeat the extremist group. Our Shin Se-min has this report.
The U.S. has expanded its aerial bombing campaign to target IS militants near Baghdad. It was the 162nd round of airstrikes by the U.S. in Iraq since early August, but the first since Washington's move to form a global coalition against IS and the first in direct support of Iraqi forces fighting the militants. This comes against a backdrop of some 30 Western and Arab countries vowing to provide military support to Iraq at the Paris summit earlier this week. France, host of the summit, has already begun surveillance flights over Iraq in preparation for further military action. Iraq's Kurds, who have scored some significant victories over IS in recent weeks, welcome the global effort to quash the extremists.
This summit in Paris is a historic summit, especially for the Kurdish people and the government. It is a very important step to destroy IS with help from friendly countries such as the great powers France, the US, and Britain.
However, the summit's joint communique made no mention of Syria, the other country IS controls large parts of. While the U.S. warned Syrian President Bashar al-Assad not to interfere with potential U.S. airstrikes inside its country, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, on Monday expressed his discontent with the U.S.-led coalition.
In the last few days, we've had some excitement, and with that excitement, we've been hearing from American officials making comments on forming a state, which are blank, hollow, and self-serving, and lack in any direction.
Although Iran says it supports the Syrian and Iraqi government's fight against the militants, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said last week that it would be inappropriate for Tehran to join the global coalition because Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Obama administration is also ramping up its response to the Ebola crisis in West Africa as the U.S. prepares to redouble its efforts to contain the spread of the deadly virus. The move comes as the United Nations says it needs $1 billion to fight what they called an unprecedented outbreak. Our Song Ji-sun has more.
Washington is beefing up its support of international efforts to get the West Africa Ebola outbreak under control. The White House said Monday that President Barack Obama will travel to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on Tuesday to meet with health officials about the epidemic and afterward announced an expansion in the number of military and medical resources to combat its spread. The measures are expected to include up to an additional 3,000 U.S. military personnel being dispatched to West Africa, along with the launch of a major healthcare training and hygiene program. The U.S. will also set up a command post in the Liberian capital of Monrovia and help build up to 17 Ebola treatment centers in the region, with a total of about 1,700 beds. As chair of the UN Security Council this month, the U.S. called for an emergency meeting this Thursday, asking member countries to come with concrete commitments to tackle the outbreak. This is only the second time in history the Council has met to address a public health crisis. The first was in 2000 when they convened over the AIDS pandemic. The World Health Organization earlier issued a warning about the Ebola outbreak, saying that the number of afflicted patients was increasing exponentially and that all the new treatment facilities have been overwhelmed. 송지선, Arirang News.
And scientists in Belgium say they found a way to block the spread of cancer in the body, paving the way for new medical treatments. Researchers at the Université Catholique de Louvain say they were able to inhibit cancerous tumors in mice from metastasizing using a special antioxidant. The process has the potential to prevent 90% of cancer deaths.
In some of these models, we found a 100% response. It means that we prevented by 100% the dissemination of metastases. And when you are a scientist and when you find this, you just fall on the ground.
Son Vo and his team now hope to extend testing to a range of cancer types with the prospect of human clinical trials in the next couple of years. And finally, switching gears to the latest tech news, Apple says online pre-orders for the new iPhone 6 and 6 Plus have hit a new record high, logging 4 million units in just the first 24 hours. The U.S. tech giant says deliveries will run through October as demand quickly outstrips supply for both the larger screen devices. With such a strong response, analysts say Apple has another game-changing product on its hands.
Look, we think Apple's done a pretty good job of kind of getting these phones ready for release and ramping up the production. It's really just the sheer size of the rollout and how to be able to kind of orchestrate all of the components.
Sales of the two iPhone models are expected to top 9 million in the first weekend across 10 countries. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to sports. The Incheon Asian Games are set to open on Friday, and so the main faction of South Korea's delegation touched ground at the Athletes' Village in the host city. Delegation Chief Park Geun-hye arrived in a group of 60 for the first wave of delegates. Now, South Korea is sending a total of 1,068 people, its biggest group ever. All of the members will be on hand at the village for the official flag-raising ceremony on Thursday. And now to Asiad football, which is currently underway. South Korea and Saudi Arabia are gearing up to clash in their second match for Group A. Both teams enter the fixture with a win, but South Korea are the favorites to take the match. Now it's a rematch of the 1986 Seoul Asiad football finals, which the Taeguk Warriors won 2-0. And meanwhile, the group stages of the UEFA Champions League kicks off in Europe on Tuesday and Wednesday local time. This year, the competition celebrates its 60th birthday, and last year's champs Real Madrid will look to defend the trophy. Now, 8 matches are scheduled for each day, so if you want to watch, check your local listings. And moving on to the MLB, Los Angeles Dodgers pitcher Lee Hyun-jin's MRI on Monday revealed no structural damage in the lefty's shoulder, but he still may be out until October baseball. Now, it's a blow for LA, who are first in the NL West and just 5 wins from clinching a playoff berth. Now, they're aiming to join their crosstown rivals, the LA Angels, who became the first team to book a spot in the MLB postseason. And that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. Stay tuned for the weather, which is coming up next.
Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. Typical early autumn conditions continue to stick around under moderate temperatures and breezy winds. On Wednesday, autumn showers are forecast for Jeju as well as areas along the southern coast, dropping about 5 to 20 millimeters of precipitation. Overall, tomorrow looks to be a cloudy day nationwide. Also, that big gap in temperatures between day and night will remain, with most regions beginning the day in the mid-teens before rising to the mid-20s in the afternoon. Here are the readings for Wednesday. Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju make it to 24, Busan to 25. As for other places, Jeju peaks at 26, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang at 23 and 22. That's your weather for this hour. I'll be back with the latest after midnight. See you then.
Thank you very much, Bo-kyung. And that's Primetime News on this Tuesday. Thanks for watching. I'm Kang Chery.
And I'm Sean Lim, and I'll see you at midnight for Late Night Edition. Have a great night.